Okay, welcome to Cinema Convos. This is the show where we bring guests with different tastes in film to have a meaningful discussion about the art of cinema. I'm your host, Yash. I'm here with my co-host, Zach, and our special guests, Sameed and Austin. Today we are discussing the film Batman Begins, which is from 2005 and was written by Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer and was directed by Christopher Nolan. And it is starring Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Liam Neeson, Katie Holmes, Gary Oldman, Cillian Murphy, Tom Wilkinson, and Ken Watanabe, Morgan Freeman. All got to sift through his giant ensembles. And then quick synopsis of Batman Begins. After witnessing his parents' death, Bruce Wayne learns the art of fighting to confront injustice. When he returns to Gotham as Batman, he must stop a secret society that intends to destroy the city. Before we get started, I wanted to issue a quick spoiler warning. We will get into plot points of this film, likely the rest of the Dark Knight trilogy, as well as various Batman-related content. So just be ready for any spoilers. If you haven't seen the films, we recommend watching them beforehand. And with that, I wanted to ask our first question to the group. What is your first memory or best memory with this movie?
Man, well, I remember watching this movie back. It was in 2005 when it came out. I think I was in how old would I have been? 9. So probably was that third grade, second or third grade. I remember watching it at like 10 p.m. at night or something, and it was just so cool because I think that was one of the first movies I got to see that was like a little more gritty and raw. Because usually when you're a kid, you're at least for me, my parents like they were very like helicopter parents, right? I didn't get to do anything. But they let me watch this, and I remember watching it when I was on a road trip with family, and man, it's just really ingrained in me. Loved it.
Uh, for me, it was so I saw I would say clips of it. I heard about Batman Begins, but I never got a chance to watch the whole thing. I mean, I didn't have. I was never a huge Batman fan, so let's go ahead with that. But I heard about Batman Begins and Christopher Nolan, so I was like, hey, let's give it a shot. And I was channel surfing because I lived in Pakistan that time. And I saw the scene of the third act when they're on the train. And I was like, wow, this is freaking amazing. I need to go ahead and see this movie again if it ever comes in on TV again. So in my newspaper, I looked up and I saw Batman Begins. It's going to be showing at this time, and I told my mom, I told my parents and my brothers and sisters, no one's going to come between this time. I want to watch this movie. My dad joined with me and watched it, and I was just blown away and how great this movie was. I think I was 14 when I saw it for the first time.
Yeah, I think the first time I watched it, so yeah, I wasn't really huge into. I mean, I liked Batman when I was a kid, but like the Batman movies, I was never huge in. I saw The Dark Knight when I was a kid, didn't remember it very much. Around 2019, 2020, I got really into DC in general, but especially Batman. I really went through 2020. I went through a real kind of Batman kick, really trying to get into. So I watched all the Batman movies and all of them. And Batman Begins, I watched the whole Dark Knight trilogy. I think pretty quick one after the other, and I really liked Batman Begins, especially knowing Christopher Nolan's style already. I'm seeing it be like, okay, it really is Christopher Nolan's style, but it's Batman. I mean, there's a whole lot of elements I like about that, but yeah.
I have a few stories I want to bring up about this movie. My very first exposure to this movie was actually we were on a flight to India and I wasn't even watching it, but it's back when they used to have like TVs like on the ceiling, like every few block of seats gets one TV, and they had Batman Begins on for like the entire flight, like on a loop basically. Like that's the entertainment for this super long flight. But my brother watched it and he was even younger than me. I mean, I was 8 at the time. He must have been like 5 or 6, and he watched it and he like really liked it. So when we came home, we got the DVD. I still have that DVD of it, but it's so funny. I think this is an important segue into like we definitely need to watch stuff that we watched as a kid that we didn't like as a kid. now. Don't watch stuff you liked as a kid now, because that has the opposite effect. But stuff you didn't like as a kid, like I thought this movie was boring as a kid. Like I'm like, until he becomes Batman, like nothing happens, and I'm like, it's all went over my head. Like so much happens, but it just doesn't, because I was all like action scenes, flashiness. I'm like, this movie isn't really my thing. But then I rewatched it years later when Dark Knight Rises was coming out, and for some reason I didn't watch The Dark Knight when it came out. I watched it like a year before The Dark Knight Rises came out, so I went back and watched all of them. And I guess some of my favorite memories of watching are just showing it, this whole trilogy, to people. Like I've shown this series to my parents, I've shown it to my uncle, shown it to one of my cousins, and I look for any excuse to rewatch the whole trilogy just because it's like my favorite trilogy. But one recent memory of Batman Begins is watching it to prep for this podcast. I had picked up the trilogy on 4K, and I had never seen this movie like in above DVD quality in my life. So it looked so much better, and I was just like, "This is it's such a good movie, regardless." But seeing it in 4K was really cool, and yeah, for me, I think the whole series is great, but this one's kind of often overlooked, I think, and frequently underrated. I think this is a great beginning chapter to this series, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Totally agree.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next. What are some of your favorite aspects of the movie on a large scale? Like anything you really want to point out that you love about this movie? Why is it a movie that's among your favorites, I guess?
One thing for me is that it's kind of like it's a really interesting twist on the whole like hero's journey, specifically the aspect of the hero and the mentor, right? Because usually in these stories, right, like if you look at something like like Star Wars, like not obviously this isn't an episode of Star Wars, but like that's a very traditional hero's journey. Like the hero learns from the mentor tends to sacrifice themselves for the hero. Pretty typical Joseph Campbell-esque kind of story.
I mean,
Um,
with the Star Wars A New Hope, I vividly remember in English class like watching it because to study archetypes and like movie like story like in a 3 act
yeah,
structure, it follows it like in a
yeah,
traditional way in every way. So
yeah. That is exactly what I was going to say. I think you hit it right on the nose right there with that. But the thing about Batman Begins is that it kind of inverts that, and like like he's like with Ra's al Ghul, right? Like he's the mentor, but he's also the final antagonist, which is it's not common. Like that's a very, at least at the time in cinematography, that wasn't something that happened very often. I don't know of any other movies that do that off the top of my head. But I thought that was really cool, and that always stood out to me even as a kid. Like that was really interesting to see that dynamic play out.
yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
Ra's al Ghul is and it's also funny because he works as a really interesting mentor character, but he's a great villain too, and how that can both be in the same movie is just crazy to me. It's really wild.
Ra's al Ghul, I love Ra's al Ghul. I especially love him in the animated series. He's so good in the animated series. I absolutely love, I don't know, him and Batman. What I like about him is he also respects Batman more so than the other ones. And that's really,
Yeah,
it's
in
like,
this movie, he knows what he's capable of, so he has to respect him. Like he literally like took down his army and like left him like, and he knows he can do that. So I think he takes him more seriously as a threat.
absolutely.
But I will say one thing about I'll mention the animated series too, because the last time we did a Batman episode, I had not watched a single episode, and now I have watched the entire series. I know often the Batman the animated series is considered like people's favorite version of Batman. It may even be true as to the comics, but for me, I still think the Nolan version is the version I love the most, just because I think it comes down to because I like crime thrillers probably more than like detective style mysteries. I think they definitely took it more that the second route, like with the newest one. But what I like about the Nolan trilogy and this movie in particular, it's a great beginning movie. It's a great origin story. It's a great movie to revisit after you've watched the other two. This movie ties into the third one in like so many different ways. Certain sequences in this movie, like when Ra's al Ghul is telling his backstory, it has a completely different feel than it did the first time you saw it. And when he says, "Are you ready to begin?" It's just like, this is the beginning of something, a great journey that's about to happen over the course of years in this character's life. Like, each movie is like 4 years apart for us, but 2 and 3 are like 8 years apart. And it's just like it's the beginning of a great like hero's journey. And I don't know, I love watching this movie.
For me, I would say this movie touches so many different themes. Um, I would say this, like me personally going through like things that I had gone through the last 3 or 4 years, because I saw like I watched Batman Begins, like, on and off day. But all right, I want to watch Batman Begins, and I'm watching. First I saw it when I had COVID. I saw it then. Um, and back then it was just like, oh, it's Batman Begins. Oh, Ra's al Ghul. Oh, favorite villain. I love the story between like how the mentor is the teacher. The mentor, the teacher's teaching Batman the ropes on how to be a vigilante, and then it turns around in which Batman's the master and Ra's al Ghul is getting let out. But now, when I watched it this week, it one thing that never really got me was the message of grief. The message of grief, the message of loneliness, and coming out of the grief. Uh, and that was a really interesting, because I never thought about it. And watching it, like, there was this very, like, you guys know the scene I'm talking about, in which uh Ra's al Ghul is telling Batman, it's like, rub your chest, your hands will take care of themselves. And then Ra's al Ghul is talking to Batman, it's like, oh, you're stronger than your father. And he was like, you never know my father. And then he starts talking about grief. And there's this really good quote that I was trying to find, but I found it, uh, about grief and rage. He's like, but I know the rage that drives you, that impossible anger, strangling the grief until the memory of your loved one is just poison in your veins. And one day you catch yourself wishing the person you love has never existed, so you would be spared your pain. Which I thought it was just like, that got me for a minute. I was just like, I had to pause, and I was like, wow, he spoke exactly how I felt, how I still feel. And I was like, man, this movie hits deep even more than it did back a couple of years back. So it's this movie, I would say, like how you said right in the beginning of this podcast, how watch a movie like when you watch it as a kid and you're watching it now, and there's so many different themes of it now that I could so say this has to be an underrated Batman movie. Not a lot of people talk about it. They always talk about the Dark Knight. They don't even talk about the Dark Knight Rises. They just consider the Dark Knight Rises being a standalone Batman movie, which in my books, I know Yash, we always talked about this, how this is a perfect trilogy. It has the beginning, it has the middle, which is the Dark Knight, and it has a conclusion, the end, which is Dark Knight Rises. So this movie, it has to be like the perfect start you can have for a Batman movie, and the perfect start for a trilogy. The
Yeah,
way
and
I
it,
think.
with the themes about grief and depression, I think it really, like, his father saying, "Why do we fall? Because we have to get back up," is very profound in a lot of ways. But that pit in the third movie is shaped exactly like the well he falls in this movie. And to me, the pit represents like his lowest, deepest position in his depression, where he's like completely trapped and he feels helpless. And him climbing out of that is overcoming that. And I think that theme kind of is sprinkled throughout the series, because he like loses Rachel in the next one and goes through a lot of grief and trauma in his life and still finds a way to fight back. So I think that's really all ties together really well. That's an overarching theme in the series. In terms of this movie, I think this movie, you bring up how this is a perfect trilogy, and I agree, because this trilogy is each you can watch the entire trilogy and have an amazing experience, but I could watch any of these movies at any time and by themselves and still have a great time, because I
Oh
think
yeah.
each movie has a complete story arc. And this is a kind of a tangent, but this is like an actual thing that's happening in cinema, where like every movie is like a part one of a bigger movie, and it's just like it doesn't feel like a complete arc. I have three examples like ready to go, like Across the Spider-Verse, Mission Impossible, Fast X,
Yes.
different qualities of film, but all doing the same thing, setting up for another one.
Okay,
I
I will say this. Fast 10, definitely. That thing, I kid you not. I
Be
was
real cinema.
I phoned you, Yash, if you remember. I was like, what the hell is this? What is this?
I think when I told you it's worse than 9, you should have lost all hope at that point.
Okay, but for the Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning spoilers,
But don't spoil Dead Reckoning for everyone. I don't know. Has everyone seen it in here?
I
I
haven't,
have.
but I also don't care. Like I mean,
Okay.
it's
Well,
not a
then
big
it's up to you, Sameed.
okay,
Zach has seen it.
I've seen it.
deal. You
all
can
right.
spoil whatever you want. Spoil to your heart's content.
Okay, Tom Cruise runs.
Tom Cruise does run. And Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, of those 3 movies, is the only one I think is a complete movie.
No, yeah, I completely agree.
Like,
And
I
that,
still feel like the story arc for Dead Reckoning Part 1 wraps up. Like, I know many people are going to be pissed about this. They're like, Across the Spider-Verse, best movie of the year. How could you say anything bad about it? But, like, the movie just ends in the middle of it. Like, it just does.
I felt so unsatisfied. I felt so unsatisfied at the end of Spider-Man. Yes. Okay. So that obviously is a great movie. Some of the best animation.
Phenomenal
I've ever
movie. It's
seen,
still one of the best
all
of
the
the
things
year.
people are saying, but I felt unsatisfied. At the end of Mission Impossible, I felt satisfied at the end. And I'm excited that the story isn't over.
Yes,
So
exactly.
that's how you make a good part 1.
And
that's the thing.
my point comes down to how, like, in this movie, it's a complete story, and then they're like, look at this guy, he just robbed a bank, he calls himself the Joker. Perfect setup for another movie while also wrapping up this movie. Like, that's how you do it. And I
At
think
least
it's all just they're all just, my thing is, I think they're just chasing the money right now. They're like, let's just make these giant movies and split them into 2. They're doing the Harry Potter thing again with like
But the thing
Mockingjay and
is-
Twilight and all of that.
Yep, it's all corporate. It's all corporate. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for like capitalism. I love it. I wouldn't be able to afford my apartment without it. But I think storytelling loses its soul when it turns into a cash flow, right? And that doesn't sound like something very profound when you say it, but when you look at what's happened to cinematography recently, that's kind of what's happening. Like you can see that trend everywhere. Like you see it with Disney acquiring Star Wars. They milked the hell out of Star Wars IP, to the detriment of the most recent trilogy. Although I think The Mandalorian was pretty good. Some people may disagree with me.
Mandalorian's
I liked the
perfect.
first 2 seasons. Season 3, I was hit or miss with that one.
I must have seen maybe one episode. I haven't finished it yet.
But season 1 and 2, really good quality stuff.
Yeah,
But I think it's just like with the Spider-Verse thing, it's like so many people are praising the movie. It's almost like blasphemy to say anything bad about it. But like I was having a discussion with my friend who like he gave the movie a 5 out of 5, and I went 4.5 out of 5 because the movie doesn't have its ending. And he's like, but it's like having a great meal and then not having the dessert. And I'm like, no, it's like having half of the great meal and not the whole thing. Like that's what it feels like to me.
Oh yeah.
So I think each movie in this series, like the second movie has a huge cliffhanger, but I can watch The Dark Knight by itself any day because the movie's about the Joker and like him terrorizing the city.
Yeah, exactly. The cliffhanger is not about leading into another story. It's just a cliffhanger about like him as a character, right? Like it's just him going off into the distance, and it doesn't depend on anything else to be like a respectable story. So that's why, again, I do completely agree. Like that was one of the beautiful things about the Dark Knight trilogies, because no matter what you think about any of the movies, all of them can be seen individually or all together. They all have shared themes. Like there's very much like a clear thought process behind all those films, and it's so cool to see that. And that's timeless. That's completely timeless.
Yeah.
It's trilogy storytelling like at its finest.
Going back to Spider-Man, but we're kind of going back.
It's relevant. It's the big comic book movie of this year. So.
Either, with the cases of the Dark Knight trilogy and Mission Impossible, none of them end right in the middle of the action. The action ends. The Spider-Man sounds like, okay, so I don't know, well, but the very end part of it, you're right in the middle of the action. You find out something huge, and you're in the middle of the action. Something crazy is about to happen. And okay, you gotta find out for the next.
My excitement of the film, like it had peaked in that moment. I was so ready for like, if that movie was 3.5 hours, I would have sat through the whole thing 3.5 hours. Like, just go the Scorsese approach, make a long movie. Like, I'm with it.
But it pisses me off more to have it end like that than I would have been much happier with like a 3.5 hour movie, or I mean, even like a 4 hour movie, ambitious for an animated film. But I'd rather you do that than end it where you ended it.
I mean, make
Yeah.
it like kind of like the Snyder cut. Make it 4 hours.
Yeah.
4 hours. I'm here to watch not a 2 hours and a half movie. I'm here to watch, like, if someone told me like, okay, Across the Spider-Verse is a two-parter, and I'm already going, oh great, okay, two-parter. They're gonna close the movie somewhere.
I
But
mean, the
movie,
initial marketing, the title was Across the Spider-Verse Part 1, but they got rid of the Part 1. And I think
they
that
did
that was to their detriment. If anything, it probably ruined people's expectations even more. Like
because
those of us who saw the trailer
it
early
was-
enough. Also, the trailer gives away a lot of stuff that's like just the movie. Like the movie,
Sony is notoriously bad for this. I think we can all agree on this. Sony is notoriously bad when it comes to trailers.
and
They're
there's another recent example that's not a big blockbuster franchise. I mean, Dune was the movie of Dune or slash Dune Part 1 is just the exposition of it feels like a bigger movie, which Dune Part 2 will get to the exciting stuff in the movie, I guess. Like that's based on a novel, so I can cut it some slack. Like they made it very clear that making this giant novel into two movies, I can respect that because the source material is there. But when you're making just a film that's part of a series, and now like Across the Spider-Verse, the next one has already been delayed because of a variety of reasons. So like we're just gonna be left waiting up for it. And I have a friend who saw Across the Spider-Verse multiple times in theaters, and I'm like, this is a fantastic movie, but I have no intention of rewatching it until the ending is available to me. Like I'm just gonna get to the same part and be like, I want more, but it's not there.
I'll buy the Steelbook. I'll buy the Steelbook.
Yeah, I'll buy the Blu-ray, but I probably won't watch it until the next one comes out. Like that's. I love the movie, but I'm being very critical of the ending, as I feel like I should.
Well, as you should be, because like nothing is more disappointing than like being invested in a story and then getting honeypotted. Like it's
Exactly.
ridiculous. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
Fast X takes notes. You left us hanging.
What are you talking
Dune,
about?
No one cares about what's happened in Fast X. They're all gonna come back from the dead anyway. No one dies in those movies. Like quite literally, no one dies.
Dune. I know you mentioned Dune. Kind of talking about that. That didn't like. I didn't feel as like.
Yeah,
I felt
didn't-
somewhat satisfied at the end. I mean, you're obviously setting up for something, and the only thing, I mean, Zendaya was marketed as a huge part of that film, and she's only in there at the very end. Obviously she'll be a bigger part in the second one. Also with Dune, you can cut some slack, not just because it is a book adaptation. Also, they tried making Dune into a single film like before, and didn't work out all that well. A lot of stuff was rushed, a lot of stuff was all left out. The 80s one doesn't have the best.
And yeah, to be fair, I'm not as critical of Dune because I feel satisfied by the individual movie. I feel like it introduces the world and characters very well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like I feel like it's the hardest for me. Like even to an extent, I mean, Fast X does end on a cliffhanger, but I feel like there is a movie there with things happening.
Yeah.
But like it's just to be clear, Across the Spider-Verse is eons better than Fast X. Like, don't get me wrong.
I love Fast X.
I mean, beautiful animation, great characters, deep themes, but you got to the best part of the movie, the big reveal, and then you just end it, and it just like I wanted to see how this ends.
And the thing is, like the action was just building up. It was just building up.
I will say the argument that I've heard that's fair is that you can watch Across the Spider-Verse as a Gwen Stacy movie, and her character has a complete arc. But Miles Morales' arc is nowhere near complete in Across the Spider-Verse.
But okay, yes, but how can you only watch it as her arc when there's a whole other arc happening? That's arguably
people just want me to be sorry for giving it a 9 and not a 10, but I cannot in good conscience give it a 10. It's just
but I think when we're talking about part twos of films and cliffhangers, I think the main thing is yes, this is kind of become a trend. There's some films and there's some sagas that really sort of have earned it and are deserving of having a part two, and then other films are just doing it because it's a cash grab or you're hopping on the bandwagon. It's trendy. There really needs to be a line between those films. The films we don't need to do it like Spider-Man shouldn't. The films like Dune, arguably even like him in Mission Impossible. I mean, on the surface, I wouldn't say they had to, but they've done the part one well enough that they deserve to have it split into two parts. Not everyone needs to do that.
Yeah, and I think the champion of this two-parter game is definitely the last Harry Potter movie. No one did it better than they did it. Because each half of the book is so distinctly different, so it's just like it really works as two different movies.
Mm-hmm.
I was still disappointed by that decision to do it in two parts. But yes, if you had split a movie into two different films, that was one of the ones that could be justifiable.
Yeah, because part one is basically Harry, Hermione, and Ron are in the countryside and trying to like survive, and the second one is like it's the finale. This is it.
I think Dune is taking a similar approach as the Harry Potter last ones did. So I'm not as critical of Dune. I just feel like I see this trend happening with big blockbusters where they just want people to come back, and maybe it comes down to like movie theater attendance not being as good as it used to be. Although with Barbenheimer, I think we're in good hands. As long as they keep releasing original stuff, people will show up, as we've seen with last weekend and this weekend. It's been busy this weekend too. Just so everyone knows, when we release this, we're recording this 1 week post Barbenheimer because this will be released after Barbenheimer.
But I'm watching Barbie on Tuesday, so
okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet either. I'll probably see it sometime.
The amount of people I've met who've watched one or the other is actually kind of like confounding. Like I thought everyone would have seen both by now, but it's not the case.
Well, I mean, also, I think with Barbenheimer, the whole meme of Barbenheimer was, the fact that you have these two very opposite kind of polar films available and competing at the same time, the same attention. Usually they would not be competing for the same audience. But the meme, the joke is that they actually are. So I'm not surprised that there's not as much overlap as people thought.
Yeah, but I guess since we were talking about movie sequels and that sort of thing, I'm curious to hear if you guys. I'm kind of jumping to a question I usually ask later, but I'm curious about it now since it's come up. Would you guys watch a fourth Chris Nolan movie in the Batman universe? And if yes, what do you think it should be about?
I'm torn on that. I'm actually torn because I think in the same sense that I would want another chocolate chip cookie. Yes, I would want I would want a fourth film in that universe. But in the sense that I really respect that trilogy and how it was nicely ended, I don't know. I don't know if it would respect. I don't know if it would respect that for there to be a fourth one. But at the same time, I'm like, but I want that cookie. You know what I mean?
I mean, if Chris Nolan was attached to it, I'd watch it for sure. Do I think we need it is a whole other conversation, because the trilogy does tell its story well. It wraps up all loose ends by the end of it. I'm pretty sure Chris Nolan in a recent interview said he doesn't want to do a superhero movie anyway. But if he did it, I'd watch it. Like he made like a Nightwing movie or like a Robin movie, like I'd watch it with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. That's about all I could see. But I don't think Christian Bale should come back as Batman, unless he came back as like old man Batman or something. Like that kind of ruined it almost. I feel like his character is in a good place when this ends. Like he doesn't need to be. He shouldn't have to go through anything again. The poor guy's been through so much.
Yeah. Didn't they try doing Old Man Batman in that one Flash movie, like that one that completely bombed recently? Or
so they actually. It was less of an old man Batman. It was more of a multiverse attempt. Because they got Michael Keaton as Batman. Yeah, like based on the Flashpoint comic, correct? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the Flash itself was okay. The movie was fine. There was a lot of hype circulating on Twitter, or I guess X, whatever it's called now.
It's Twitter.
It's Twitter, just like Meta is still Facebook.
It's Twitter.
And Gig'em Week is still Gig'em Week in my eyes.
Howdy Week.
So naming conventions, but that like James Gunn was going online like this is the best DC movie ever, and I'm like, that's kind of funny for the guy who's like taken over DC to be saying that. And like it was hyped as like this great comic book movie, and it was fine. It was just like, okay, it's funny, it has some action, has mediocre effects. Like it's a superhero movie. That's it. Like it has Ezra Miller in it. That's not a great thing to have in your movie. Um, he tried to fight the entire nation of Hawaii or state of Hawaii for no reason.
And that chair, when it comes out, ooh, you better duck. You better duck. Ezra Miller
Okay.
is out there.
But yes, that's a good point. They did. I thought Michael Keaton as Batman was one of the highlights of the movie, though. I don't even like the Michael Keaton Batmans that much, but I think he's great at playing the character. So it's fun to see him again.
I was actually excited with Supergirl introduction.
Yeah, she was. I would actually love for what's the actress's name? I would love for her to be Supergirl again. Actually,
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, Henry Calvin will always be the best Superman for me.
Yeah.
Man of Steel, but her like as kind of like, oh, Flashpoint point of view, I thought she did incredible, and I hope DC like makes movies based on her character.
Well, what ties into all of this is that there is a general sense of superhero fatigue right now because there was just so much content with Marvel and DC for a long time. Just from the Secret Invasion, I think it's the worst Marvel project I've ever seen out of all 40 of them. So that's saying something. But yeah, that was, I don't know who was in the writer's room or what drugs they had, but I'm really curious because that was wacky as hell. But what I like about the Dark Knight trilogy is like you don't really have to be a superhero fan to enjoy these movies. They're very much like crime thrillers. They take superhero characters, like Chris Nolan made these well-known established characters his own. He made different versions of them. Like it didn't resonate with everybody. Like I know people saw Bane's arc in The Dark Knight Rises and they're like, that's what you did to Bane? Like like they didn't like it. But I think it's really interesting how he takes well-known names like the Joker, the Riddler, Cillian Murphy as the Riddler, underrated. He's in all three movies too, and he's gonna win an Oscar for Oppenheimer, or I'm boycotting the Oscars. Anyways, going on. He takes characters.
But if I could also talk about
Yeah, please.
the Dark Knight trilogy, I do not want to see a fourth film in the Dark Knight trilogy because that trilogy is complete. Christopher Nolan Batman. You mentioned Old Man Batman. That could be fun. I would see Batman Beyond as Michael or as Christian Bale's old Batman. I'm not sure. Be Christian Bale's old Batman. This would have to be made in like 15 years or something. I'd love it though. I'd watch that. It's the only way I'd watch another Christopher Nolan Batman is if it's Batman Beyond.
And just to kind of like finish it up, no, I would not want the trilogy is a trilogy. That's it. It had an ending, like I said, it had a beginning, had a middle, had an ending. I don't want the fourth one. It was a perfect closure.
And the beautiful thing about being a Batman fan is there's content everywhere. I can name comics I've read. There's a new version with Robert Pattinson. There's four incredible video games: Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, Arkham Origins, Arkham Knight. I heard I don't know if any of y'all ever played it, but there was a movie tie-in to this game that I heard is like pretty decent. Like it's not that bad, which is the best thing you can say about a movie tie-in game usually. But I never played it. It was on like PS2 and Xbox.
Like
but
Spider-Man one.
The Spider-Man 2 is one of the greatest. I mean, that's
I'm talking about the first one.
Oh, I had that thing too, where you swung webs in the air and swung around.
And you played Green Goblin. You played Green Goblin.
It's a great time to be a Spider-Man fan too, with the PS5 games and Spider-Verse and No Way Home and everything. But and then also I will say, I'll mention we brought up Zack Snyder's verse. Ben Affleck as Batman, I think wasn't that bad. I just think he wasn't given much to do as the character.
Wasn't given justice.
Yeah, he was given Justice League twice, but he wasn't given justice.
Mm-hmm.
Wordplay. I don't know.
That was clever. That was clever. I'm just not a fan of Snyder at all, to be honest. I know that some people like his style, but I just don't. It's too, what's the word I'm looking for?
I like his visual style, but I do think his storytelling can be lacking. I think Nolan has the same grittiness, but he's also knows how to tell a story. And I know a lot of people criticize Chris Nolan for having paper thin characters, which I think is you can only make that case for Dunkirk, which that's the point, and Tenet, which is, Nolan being Nolan. I think in the Batman trilogy, he has phenomenal characters. I know they're like versions of existing characters, but they're very much his own characters. Like,
all of them.
um,
I mean, like even the villain in this movie, you're thinking, okay, it's Scarecrow. Scarecrow's the villain, but it's like no, it's both of them.
and,
It's
and I also noticed like with Bruce Wayne, it's he when he's young, he's kind of a jerk, and it's probably because he's processing that trauma. Like he's mean to Alfred. He's ready to shoot this man who like killed his parents and get revenge. And it's not until like Carmine Falcone is like, it's like, yeah, you've gone through something, but you've never known like real suffering, and like it kind of wakes him up.
that's where the grief part kicks in.
Like he has a
That's the
character arc throughout this movie. He's not even likable for like half the movie if you really think about it.
and that's the thing. That's the grief. That's literally the grief part. Because I mean, me personally, like was gonna be 2 years in 2 months from now. I mean, for me, it's like personally, if someone says to me like, "Sameed, you change," I was like, "Well, yeah, duh. What do you expect? I lost someone very significant in my life. You think I'm gonna be fine? I'm just walk down the street like, oh, that never happened. No." And that's kind of what when I was watching the movie, I was like, "Oh my god, I went through the same process." You don't want to be a jerk, but it's coming out as a jerk. It's like when Alfred is like talking to Wayne as they're climbing up the case of stairs. He's like, this is a mausoleum. If I had power, I would have taken this out brick by brick. And and when Bruce is just like, why do you care, Alfred? Don't why do you give a damn? And it's just him just soul processing the grief, not accepting, like accepted, but has not accepted.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
I think, talking about other Batman media, I think it's interesting how this movie processes Batman, his grief. And I kind of want to see how the Robert Pattinson Batman, how that processes his grief. Because it's interesting because it processes his grief later into his saga, the Brown Barrett's of Batman, we get to the film, talking about this, we get into the film, his second year as Batman, it's well into his arc. I didn't initially buy Robert Pattinson, well, let alone him as Batman, as Bruce Wayne. I didn't buy him as Bruce Wayne. I felt, okay, he isn't as likable. He isn't as charming as Christian Bale's Bruce Wayne. I don't believe this guy is Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne wouldn't be all rooting and standoffish. And then it kind of took me at scene in the Batman when I'm talking to Alfred about finding that about his dad, that I was realizing, oh, this standoffishness is brooding. He's still processing his grief. Robert Pattinson is playing a Bruce Wayne that's much more stricken with grief well into his saga as Batman than Christian Bale is. I thought that was a really interesting choice.
I think one of the stark differences I like Christian Bale's Batman more than Robert Pattinson so far, but Robert definitely has time to prove himself over the years. And I think the Batman also did a great job of telling a complete story while also setting up for more. I think it's a movie that did it well. The biggest difference I noticed with Nolan's trilogy and the Batman is, well, first of all, like obviously, like Batman's more of a detective in the new ones, not really like in the Nolan trilogy. He's like a trained ninja, like, so it's different, I guess. His skill sets are different, but the biggest difference I notice is in the Nolan trilogy, Gotham is never presented as this like perfect place by any means, but like they show like everyone can be corrupted. There's bad people. The city's a mess, right? And every movie kind of will show you like glimmers of hope that there are good people in Gotham. Like especially in the second movie when they don't blow up the boats. That's a huge moment for the trilogy, showing that like the city is not totally unredeemable. Watching the Batman, like even when it ends, I'm like, yeah, that Gotham is horrible. I would never want to live there. There's no redeeming qualities. It's just a bad place to live. But like Chris Nolan's Gotham, I'm like, okay, the city has a lot of problems, but it's not without, like, it seems fixable.
It's like how one of my friends says it's like Dark Knight and about a difference of Gotham. The Dark Knight, like what Yash said, you know, has, there are good people here, everything's gonna be fine. The bad men go outside, you get shot. You look up, you get shot. You're in a train, you'll get shot and mugged. It's just like you open the goddamn window, the wind will shoot you. It's like
It's like
damn.
also there's also a comparison I saw with the Joker and was it like the original Batman, like with not the original, but the original with Michael Keaton, like one of the older ones, and how like in the 80s they put the Joker in a vat of acid, but in 2019 they just put him in society and he became the Joker. Like that was, I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of the similar. All the comic book fans from the early 2000s, like us, have all grown up. So I think telling more adult, like dark stories appeals to us. Like Logan's one of my favorite comic book movies, and there's no way I could have watched that as a kid. Like I would be way too much violence for me. But it's a great movie, and I think with the Batman, with Joker, they're capitalizing on that. Like let's tell stories about adults for adults, but with comic book characters. I think it's interesting. I think once I saw there was an audience for it, which Deadpool and Logan played a huge hand in that. They're like, we can make R-rated comic book movies. It's fine. Will Marvel ever do it? I don't know. Not under Disney's wing.
Actually, I do have a question on this since we're talking about dark and gloomy. I noticed this. Now, if you watch the Tobey Maguire one and you watch Tom Holland, one thing I do find something is similar, a difference, big difference is Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, it feels more adult based. It's very adult like content, like straight up, you watch a trailer and you're also going like, all right, like if I was a parent watching a trailer, I'd be like, yeah, that's more for me, not for
The
my
Green Goblin traumatizing us as kids is a core memory for most of us, sir.
exactly. But you watch the Tom Holland one, and it's more likable. It's more fun. It's friendly. It's all like, oh my god, oh, Mr. Stark. Oh no, what am I gonna do? It's more
Well, it's
like it's
funny. It's funny you bring up the Sam Raimi trilogy because I think it's directly comparable to this trilogy. It definitely tackles a lot of big grown-up ideas. Spider-Man 3 is a bit of a mess, but ultimately it is a movie that
hey,
explores
the dance scene is one of the
it
best scenes.
explores forgiveness. It's an important theme in that movie. But yeah, the dancing is incredible. I actually think it deserves to be in the movie. It's a great. I remember seeing that opening night on the big screen, and my life was changed forever. that was
Guys are like,
that,
yo, I gotta go either dance in New York City or I gotta go to a jazz
it's
bar.
so, dude. Watching that movie as a 10-year-old, I was like, wow, he's such a cool, like rebellious guy. Now I'm just like, oh no, this is not at all what a cool person would do. Like he like
Dude,
straightens his
you
hair and
know,
like.
start finger pointing and making gunshots everywhere you go.
But
I
my
can't take
my point comes back to how like the Sam Raimi trilogy is a trilogy. It's three movies and it feels complete. It's very self-contained. It's not concerned with any multiverse stuff or anything. It's just like here's a movie about Peter Parker and that's it. It's not like Peter Parker in a different universe or like it's just him dealing with his own life and his life as Spider-Man. And that's why Tobey Maguire is still my favorite Spider-Man, not Batman. But Spider-Man 2 is one of my favorite Spider comic book movies, period, because I think it's a beautiful story about like finding the will to do something. It's more than just like an action blockbuster, which it has plenty of like heart-stopping action, but I think the Dark Knight trilogy, and especially Batman Begins, does that so well. Because Batman Begins, like you said, it's a movie about like processing your grief and like I guess becoming more than just a man, like as he says, like in the movie, becoming a symbol. I don't know. I think it's super cool. But anyways, if y'all have anything else to say, or I could just ask a question. We're kind of rambling. Me and Sameed, this is just how we are.
it. That's kind of how we talk, guys. Sorry.
Feel free to talk over us at any time.
Hit us with some more questions, yeah.
Sure. So, this movie is directed by Christopher Nolan. It's also co-written by Christopher Nolan. So, personally, he's probably my favorite director, honestly, but at least one of my favorite directors. So, I wanted to ask, what about his style appeals to you, and what about his style in this particular film draws you in? And I guess his writing style too, if that's applicable, since he also wrote it.
Oh, so who wants to start on this one? Because I have a huge note here. So, all right, I'll start. For me, Christopher Nolan is the one theme I think me and Josh we always talk about is this concept of time. His whole filmography is all about time. It has to do something with Dunkirk. That is like literally time based. Interstellar, time based. The Dark Knight. Okay, you're in the middle of Gotham. You can either go and save Rachel, or you can save Harvey Dent. You have this many. Where are you gonna go? How's it gonna be? And this one is basically time showing you the process of grief, going back to society, the same society that kind of put you as an outcast, but now you're trying to come out of the outcast and be more than just a man, but be a symbol. So it shows you the theme of time. And that what gets me with Christopher Nolan is that time is his theme, and it always sticks with that. He has made all his movies. You could always see time being the main theme of the movie. That to me, what draws me to Christopher Nolan.
I guess for me, I like thinking about it, especially if we look in the context of superhero movies in general. I actually would go so far as to say that the that Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy is less of a superhero movie and more of a movie about. I mean, we've talked about depression and grief and struggle. It's a movie about people, and I think that Christopher Nolan does a very good job of making movies that are about real people. I know, like we say real. Let's be generous with the term real, but like they're relatable people. You look at, you know, DC, the more recent DC movies or the Marvel craze. There's nothing particularly relatable about the characters. I mean, yeah, they're sometimes they're fun watches, right? Because it's like sometimes there's tongue-in-cheek humor. They're powerful. They face their own like cosmic level struggles, but they're not people. Whereas when we talk about like Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy, you see that he's like an individual. He struggles with love, with loss, a lot of things that we all experience. And I think that Nolan does a great job of making that all feel like grand, but also relatable, and regardless of what medium or what kind of genre he's making a film in. So that's what I particularly appreciate about him. I'm happy to. If someone
Yeah,
disagrees with that, then let me know. But that's what I've observed, at least.
I agree.
I would say I agree. I mean, I think you mentioned how this movie really humanizes Bruce Wayne and Batman, and I think that's great because often people will say like, oh, well, Bruce Wayne's just a rich guy, I can't really connect with him. But in this movie it shows that he goes through so many things that any person can really go through. And I think in this particular trilogy I like how it's very focused on his character journey. In terms of Nolan's style, I think in every film he's done, he redefines what a genre can be. Like this is a superhero movie, but like Interstellar is a space movie, and Tenet is a spy movie, and then Oppenheimer is a historical biopic, and it's always like unlike anything you've seen in the genre before, regardless of what it is, whether you like it or not. It's going to be something like you've never seen before, and I think that's why I'm always such a fan of his movies. But in terms of the Dark Knight trilogy, I think they're like quite possibly the best paced movies out of all the entire filmography. Like Batman Begins is 2 hours and 20 minutes, and I did not feel like it when I was rewatching it to prep for this. I was like, oh, this movie's already over. Like we're at the train scene already. Like there's like once he becomes like all the origin stuff is so cool. It's like builds up the hype. And then once he's Batman, the movie is nonstop. There's something happening every scene. There's like a huge Batmobile chase that I love, and then everything is phenomenal after that. Like
Yeah,
it's
talk about that in a bit.
and then just getting to Nolan's style, I'm trying to get at is that I think I saw it in another review, but his movies really do feel like when they come out, it's an event. Like people want to see what he's come up with, whether it's something they like or something they don't really like. And I won't get into spoilers for Oppenheimer, but with Oppenheimer, most recently he gave us something that had a lot of It had some spectacle in certain aspects. Of course, he's like the spectacle king, doing everything practically. But it's a very, very human story with lots of like character moments, dialogue, and it's completely subverted expectations because it's all the marketing was like this is about the atomic bomb, and I'm like, yeah, an hour of it is, but it's a 3 hour movie. There's a lot of other things in the movie that are about Oppenheimer and his history, and I think I get confused at when people criticize Nolan for having thin characters because to me these are such character driven movies. Like he really captures what it is to be a human being in his stories, and he uses big blockbuster cinema to do that. So for me, it's just that he's made blockbuster cinema cerebral again. It's like no one can call his movies mindless. There's so many movies people are like that was mindless fun, and this his movies can be like have the same energy. Like this has the same energy as a Michael Bay Transformers movie because it's so much action, so much spectacle, but it's so well done. It's done in its top form. It's done by it's like the person who's like it's like your valedictorian made a movie versus like the person right at the bottom. Like it's not it's like very it's like the same goal but different execution. I don't know. I'm just rambling. But anyways, feel free to
Absolutely.
add anything, Zach.
You talk about the criticism of Nolan's films having thin characters. I don't really see that. I mean,
I was getting into it with one of my friends. And he was like, "Tell me one thing about Cobb," and I'm like, "Cobb getting back to his family in Inception is the heart of the movie. Like, what are you
yes.
talking about? like it doesn't make
That's
sense
the
to
whole
me."
thing.
One, yeah. Well, one thing I've noticed about Nolan's films, they are usually centered on like ambitious, charming like protagonists who are haunted by something, and we often explore kind of what haunts them and what drives them and how it gets them to their goal. I mean, with Bruce Wayne, it's the grief of losing his parents. Within the case of Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale's character in the Prestige, it's jealousy, trying to one up the other. In a case of Cobb and Inception, as you said, Yash, is about getting his family back, and also the grief. He's also had grief himself. It goes through that grief. I think that there's one. I mean, we've already talked about time, but I think this is another common theme that you can see go through Christopher Nolan's films.
Yeah, and since we're talking about Nolan, I'm gonna drop my Chris Nolan rankings real quick because I've seen all of his movies. There's only 12, so it's not. So I have, and I'll say where the Batman Begins ends up for me. Just before I get, I would currently give 7 of his films a 10 out of 10. Oh yeah, one more thing I love about Nolan. I think all of his films demand at least 2 watches, which I think is unlike any filmmaker. Like it's not that you should watch it twice. It's like you have to watch it twice. Like it really adds. There's so many layers to every film, and I think I've seen every film twice except for Memento and Insomnia. So actually, and then Oppenheimer. Obviously, I haven't seen that twice yet.
To be honest, I really want to go and watch Oppenheimer.
I do need to
again.
watch it again, but I think I'm gonna do it at home with with subs and breaks.
4K old.
But number one's The Dark Knight. But I think this whole trilogy kind of stands as one of my favorite trilogies. But The Dark Knight, Inception, The Prestige, Dark Knight Rises. I got Batman Begins number 5. So it's my least favorite of the 3, but by a very thin margin. They're all perfect films. Number 6, I have Dunkirk. 7, I have Interstellar. Number 8, I have Oppenheimer. 9, Tenet. That's probably my hottest take. Number 10, Memento. Memento is a beloved film. It's a little lower on the list. Number 11, Following, which is his first film. And number 12, Insomnia, which I still think is good, just not great. But Robin Williams, Al Pacino are in that film. It's an interesting one that I've only seen once. So my opinion might not even be final on it because it's a Nolan film and I've only seen it once.
I could agree. I'll definitely agree on the ranking. The thing is, I think me and you talk about this all the time. Like we consider Nolan like our favorite director. Like I think me and you could totally agree on this one because we could go and talk about Nolan and how amazing it is for over hours and hours. I don't know. It'd be like on a given random Tuesday, I could give you a phone call and you'd be like, "Hey, what's going on? Oh, not much. Want to talk about Nolan? Yeah, sure, okay." And we're just talking about Nolan for like about an hour or two. But one thing I do have to say this about Nolan is that all his like it is you got to watch it twice. All his movies, and not because of confusion. Inception, okay, I did have to watch it twice. Tenet, well, we have to
I mean,
watch
Tenet is still confusing, and I've seen it 3 times. But but most of his
it for the
films, I think,
subtitles, and the sound mixing does not help.
yeah, the score overpowered the dialogue just way too much for a film as convoluted as that one was. But I still love it. Still think it's great. It's the only movie I saw during the pandemic in theaters, so I risked it all for Chris Nolan.
I
I
saw
wouldn't,
it.
I wouldn't do it for Greta Gerwig. So there's my alliance, Chris Nolan.
Love that.
All right. Did anyone else have anything to say about Nolan, or should I drop a question?
I was gonna disagree with your ranking slightly, but
Yes, no, please. Actually, I want to hear your rankings because I think Chris Nolan's one of those filmmakers where the rankings vary from person to person completely.
for the sake of getting around to other questions too, I'll only talk about the Batman films, but I wouldn't have put. I don't think I would have put Batman Begins as the last one. I think I would have done. This is potentially controversial for some. I would have actually. I would have put Batman Begins first.
Yeah.
I would have gone in release order actually.
Okay. I mean, yeah, Batman Begins this brings up a good point because I think this is one of those trilogies where if someone tells me with the Dark Knight trilogy, you could say any of these movies is your favorite, and I think there's validity in your response. Like, because I think they are telling somewhat different stories. Um like my mom thinks Batman Begins is her favorite of the three, and I'll be honest, most people say The Dark Knight is their favorite. That's just like the mainstream answer. But I'm very fascinated when people say the first or the third is their favorite because you don't find it as much.
Right.
I love the third movie. I think the third movie is underrated, if anything. I know a lot of people don't like that one very much. I think it's more of just how it makes me feel. I know it has some plot holes that it's fair criticisms, but I just love the trilogy. And to be honest, I go back and forth on Dark Knight's my favorite, but the first and third, whenever I rewatch them, I'm like, which one do I actually like more or less? Who knows?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. No, all I was going to say is I think that it's a disagreement, but it's like it's splitting hairs because none of them are bad. Like
It's marginal because for me, they're all 5 out of 5 movies.
they're
So
all
it's
like the things you can disagree on are going to be like the most subtle of differences. And like I think for me again, like I will admit a lot of it is very nostalgia driven because that was probably one of my first ever like kind of movies that just made me really think. But I think that The Dark Knight it makes us ask a lot of questions. It's a very thought provoking movie. So I can 100% see why that would be a lot of people's favorite. I totally get that. But anyway, I digress.
I mean,
It was
the
against
only
my
reason The
taste.
Dark Knight gets the leg up is just because I think Heath Ledger's performance in that film is like beyond anything I've ever seen in
Oh
a
yeah.
movie. So I think that's really the only reason that it gets the leg up. Like I love all the villains in Batman. I think Liam Neeson's great. I think Tom Hardy is physically terrifying in The Dark Knight Rises. But the psychological game that Heath Ledger's Joker plays with Batman is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. I think it's sort of interesting that The Dark Knight, it does seem it's the second film in the trilogy. It's interesting that the second film in the trilogy is usually what people say is the best. However, come to think of it, there's a lot of trilogies where a lot of people say that the second is the best. I mean, consensus. I know the original Star Wars trilogy, a lot of people say Empire is the best. People say that the second Godfather is the best. I've heard people
I
say
would
that
agree.
I've heard people say that Spider-Man 2 is the best. I've heard people say that.
Spider-Man 2 is the best,
So
in my opinion.
I thought
Sorry,
it was
to
odd.
clarify.
That
Yeah,
might be objectively true.
yeah, it's objectively true. I wasn't sure how objective that was, but
It's a phenomenal movie. It's really, to me, Spider-Man 2 is the peak of early 2000s comic book movies, like not including Batman Begins if that's early 2000s, but like that whole vibe of just like we had like X-Men and just all of those movies that were like early the pioneers of the genre. I think Spider-Man 2 really showed what a human story about a superhero could look like.
so I guess it's not as rare as I thought. But like, how come so many trilogies have that second one as their strongest film?
Well, with Spider-Man, I think it's because the third film didn't live up to expectations. Um,
Okay, well, then
with
how
the
come
stuff,
it's better than the first one then?
I mean, it's like they're able to they're able to improve and then they're not able to do it again, basically. I don't know. Like Return of the Jedi is a beloved movie from Star Wars fans, but critically it didn't do well, like
Uh,
back in the day.
like for movies that are sequels is basically like, all right, for me, how I put sequels like Terminator 2 or um
Another
what was
great like sequel that's
Oh
better than
yeah.
the rest of them, probably, actually. Yeah.
yeah.
I would
Rise of the
argue
Dawn
Aliens is better than Alien, but that's more of a divisive topic.
Alien,
That's
I've heard that too.
depends on what you prefer, I think. Like, 'cause they're so different.
with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, right? All of those movies, I find them as this. First one was good. Great. Now, all the ideas that we have in the first one, let's go ahead and put it in the second one. That's how I think. And that's how we have so much better of a sequel than a trilogy. Except for the Dark Knight, right? But the Dark Knight trilogy, that's a different thing. But it's like because and when you have an idea, how many times has it been that you're just thinking, you're like, "Ooh, this will be good," and you're like, "Ooh, that would be good," and you're just circling ideas, and you're like, "You know what? I'm gonna make this first movie," and when the second one with the studio knocks on my door again, we're making a sequel. Well, boom, I already got it. When Batman Begins, well, we had Batman talking to Lieutenant Gordon now, and Gordon's telling him like, "Oh, he has a taste of three apples like you," and then he's a calling card for it's over. It's Joker. And as fans, we were like, "Oh my god, Joker!" You see Batman just going, "I'll look into it," and then he has that really awesome dialogue between he's like, how will I thank you?" And Batman looks and says, "You'll never have to," and then jumps off. So it's like it just builds on like of just having ideas.
I agree with that.
So I'm gonna kind of ask a twofold. Do you have a favorite character or do you have a favorite scene? And if you have a favorite scene, break down that scene and tell us why it's your favorite scene.
Hmm. Honestly, it's probably not. I mean, if we're gonna say favorite characters aside from Batman, I have to say I really did enjoy and still do to this day Killian Murphy's take on Scarecrow. It
It's
was
really good.
oh, it was just fantastic, and like that one scene where he and all of his goons are in that middle of that warehouse, and then they realize Batman's showing up, and how all of them are flipping shit. And excuse my French, but all of
Oh,
them
oh
are
yeah, you can curse. I forgot to mention that. It's
yeah,
it's totally fine.
like all of them are just kind of like they're shooting bricks, right? And he's just kind of excited, like he's like got this insane like he's finally here kind of look. Like just that whole performance was so interesting to me. I
It's
just
it's like it's like a it's so theatrical. I love it. Like he's like the Batman. Like he's just like doing this whole thing and it's so like over the top and I love it. Like it honestly feels like Killian Murphy walked so like Heath Ledger could run. Like
yeah.
it's like an introductory to like an insane,
Totally.
totally like psycho villain. And I think in general Killian Murphy in every Nolan film has a standout moment in almost every film. And I think that's why he finally got his like main character moment this year because he's such a good actor. Um, but yeah,
Sure.
I think I won't say I have a favorite character, but if I have a character that's often overlooked in this franchise, it's definitely Killian Murphy as Scarecrow. I can't pick a favorite scene. To me, the movie, like as soon as the bats show up in the cave, like it's game time. The rest of the movie is one big amazing scene. So I really can't pick one. I will highlight one scene just to highlight something. I'll highlight the scene where he reveals to Rachel that he's Batman with using the word she said to him earlier. I think that scene is as dramatic as it is. I love it. Like the speech he gives, and she's like, "Oh, Bruce, it's you." And then he just jumps and terrifies a bunch of people who are like are like have been poisoned. But I love it.
I love that too.
So I don't know if
I
y'all have favorite characters or scenes, Sameed or Zach, but that's my take.
Zach, you go first.
Favorite scene. I'm trying to think of my favorite scene. I do like kind of near the end of the film where kind of like panic is kind of setting in. I guess the toxin's already been released. Just how him and Gordon kind of work in tandem essentially. I really like that scene where the only way he can get across the bridge is through is with the Batmobile. I do like that.
I also want to highlight actually, one of the greatest characters in this series is Michael Caine as Alfred. I think it's a.
Yes.
I think it's.
Often overlooked.
Yes.
I think he's the version of Alfred I feel the most emotionally connected to, and I feel like through and through, it's a version of Alfred that really cares about Bruce Wayne, like in every way. He never abandons him. He always does what he believes is in the best interest for him. He doesn't want him to experience pain. He does do some questionably moral things by like not showing him the letter and stuff, but it's all in the best interest. So I just love his performance, and I don't think I'll ever see a better version of Alfred.
No.
Just like I don't think I'll ever see a better version of Joker. But you gotta
Uh,
highlight Michael Caine.
My favorite has to be Murphy, Scarecrow. That he's underrated, straight up underrated. I think that is one character, like what Yash says, like every movie that is in the trilogy, he has a defining moment. Every one of them. And for the favorite scene, it has to be when Bruce goes to Arkham Asylum. From that scene all the way to uh, uh Alfred going to Bruce Wayne, like when you said about this is not about thrill seeking, it's about saving the city. And he's like, yeah, it's all about that. And then he puts his finger like, and what do you call that? And it shows like the chase scene that he had with someone. He's like, as he signed his bow tie, damn good television. And that scene is just like that's it. That is like that, and I'm also gonna add the dialogue of the movie. The entire dialogue of the movie. You could quote by quote. Like it has the most amazing quotes, the most
There's some
amazing
memorable
dialogue.
quotes. Gary Oldman says, "I gotta get me one of those."
I
Yeah.
love that. That's gotta be
There's
my
a goofy
favorite
side to
line.
this movie that I actually really like. There's one quote I'll mention that I say out of
Flying over
context,
rooftops.
out of context regularly. I say that's power you can't buy, and it's usually when I'm out with friends, and it's over the smallest things, but it's just like a line I say often. But anyways, I know Zach had something to say a second ago.
Talking about Alfred, Michael Caine. I mean, he is the version of Alfred. I mean, and that really goes to just Michael Caine's quality as an actor, as a performer, and as a mainstay in Christopher Nolan films. One question I do have for you, well, I guess for everybody. So, in the most recent iteration of the Batman, what did you think of Andy Serkis as Alfred?
I thought he was fine. He wasn't really given much to do, I feel like I feel like Michael Caine's Alfred is like the heart of the story in a lot of ways. But I mean, I thought he was fine. I don't know. The Batman feels like a whole new thing. Like it doesn't even feel like I should compare it to the Dark Knight trilogy yet because there's so much that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah,
The thing is that the Batman was just about the Batman. It wasn't about Bruce Wayne. It was just about the Batman. Yes, you had glimpses about Bruce Wayne. You see Bruce Wayne, but it's all about the Batman. That's what I say. That's why we haven't got enough screen time with Andy Serkis as Alfred. Like for us, Michael Caine was like in the movie majority of the time, but amazing dialogue. And that's the thing. It's like with Michael Caine, it's like basically he has, like I said, amazing dialogues, and his dialogues are like constantly rolling. He's in the scenes, and it's like he's like, what is Bruce Wayne's turn to be in the movie? He is there as a supporting actor, and he is there to drop bombs. And what I mean to drop bombs, to drop dialogues or some action scenes, like in the movie when Ra's al Ghul's goons are like standing by the fire. He brought a golf club, like hit him in the back. He's like, "Oh, I hope you're not part of the member of the fire brigade." And then goes in and sees Batman on the ground. He's like, "Master Wayne," and you see Master Wayne trying to pick up a log, and he goes like, "What's the point of those push-ups when you can't pick up a bloody log?" So it's just like,
love that.
I feel like
you
Michael
know,
Caine's Alfred has a bit of a sense of humor and
Oh,
he's
he's
less
very
like bleak all the time. And I think because this is an origin story and we actually get to see Batman's origin story, which we don't get to see with Ben Affleck or Robert Pattinson, because I get it, they wanted to do something different. They don't want to just keep saying the same thing over and over again. Um, but seeing his origin story play out, like seeing his parents get killed, seeing the role Alfred plays in his life after that happens, you feel more of an emotional attachment. Maybe that's what's missing with Andy Serkis or I think it was Jeremy Irons in the other one, most recently. But I think, yeah, I think it's just, and it's an interesting choice to not do an origin story just for the sake of not retreading old waters. But the Amazing Spider-Man did that with Andrew Garfield, and I actually thought it was a good choice to show Uncle Ben getting killed again because there are certain things that drive these superheroes, and I think Bruce Wayne's parents getting killed as a result of his fear of bats in these movies is what it sparks this whole character arc that he's unaware of. Whereas like you don't see any of that. Like the Batman, he's just like, I'm Batman and I've been doing this a few years and this is who I am. This place is a horrible place and I live here. Like that's I love the movie, but it's not going for the same thing at all.
No.
Can we talk about Bruce Wayne's voice as Batman? Can we talk about that?
Okay, so
What is up with
it is a little silly, but you know what? He's protecting his
Where the
identity.
guns going? He's like,
Where's the trigger? That's the one I remember.
Hey, he has to hide his identity. Bruce Wayne is a well-known individual. He has to hide his voice. He has to mask his voice.
Yeah.
And what's the best way to mask your voice? Have a super low voice. No one can recognize you.
It is one of the sillier elements of the movie, but I will say one thing I like is they show how he has to like play the part of Bruce Wayne, like billionaire, playboy, like, and he does that so like to like people don't suspect that this rich guy is actually Batman, and I think that's kind of clever. But yeah, the voice thing I admit is a bit silly, but I don't mind it personally.
I'm just gonna say that's like the whole trilogy. Bane's voice, like, oh, Batman.
Yeah, there's a bit of theatricality to these movies, but also that's something they say, right? Like theatricality and deception. So
nobody cared who I was until I put on the mask.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anne Hathaway as Catwoman.
Don't get me started, dude.
Yeah, I was like,
love of my life.
Hey, I got no problem with Anne Hathaway. I love Diaries.
Anne Hathaway specifically as Catwoman, just to be clear.
Oh no, I know that. Like, Anne Hathaway will always be my favorite. I love her in The Princess Diaries. I will watch that movie on repeat. I love those movies. But her voice as deep, like as her like Batman's voice with Bruce Wayne, I think that is straight up comical. It's like, okay, and I love you truly as a fan, but no, you keep your normal voice. Don't change it, please.
Yeah, I mean, the movie came out when I was 16, so I don't know if I have the same opinion there. I kind of like the deep voice. I don't know. Yeah, Chris Nolan knew what he was doing. That's all I can say on the air. Moving on. Speaking of, you brought up a few actors there, but for me, Christian Bale is actually one of my favorite actors, even outside of Batman. I think he always does really interesting work with like transforming his body and like, taking on these characters that he looks nothing like in real life. Like he played Dick Cheney. In American Hustle, he's pretty unrecognizable too. So I think he's just a very good actor. I do think Chris Nolan, especially nowadays, gets these big ensembles because he can. One of the biggest directors in Hollywood. But do you guys have any? I don't know. Are there any actors in this film that you feel like you're a fan of or you follow their work? For me, it's Christian Bale, Cillian Murphy. I think, especially now, Liam Neeson at a time, but not really anymore. But yeah, I think that's about it. Unless I'm forgetting somebody.
Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman, yeah.
Morgan Freeman, yeah. I left out the guy who played God. That's my bad.
Andy Dufresne was my best friend. Come on.
I mean, I'm just thinking of people like when I see that actor, I'm like, I'm watching the movie because I know they've given it 110%. And for me, there's like a short list. It's like Christian Bale, like Leo DiCaprio. Like there's a few actors I seek out solely because they're involved.
Christian Bale, I mean, I think is a good one. I mean, there's rarely films.
I'm not like, oh, a new Katie Holmes movie is out. I'm gonna go run to the theaters and watch it. Like,
I remember the last time I've seen. I don't remember the last movie Katie Holmes.
She hasn't really been acting anymore. I don't think.
And then
She
she,
doesn't.
She was recast in this franchise. I mean,
through that whole saga, through that whole, other saga she's been through. She needs time to recover.
yeah, Dead Reckoning. That's what it's called, right? That's what the movie's about.
And we tie it back to Mission Impossible. Love it.
We tie everything together by the end of this episode.
But talked about Christian Bale. That's the thing. Any movie he's in, he's the anchor of the film. New Hollywood now, has gotten away from. Used to be the reason you see a movie is because of the actor. Now it's less of that. It's more of, there's other factors involved. In old Hollywood, It was just because, there's an actor, it's an unfamiliar story, but it's okay. There's an actor, There's few actors now that have that sort of pull that I don't care what the movie is. If this guy's the star of it, I'm seeing it. I think Christian Bale is one of those guys.
Yeah, I think so.
With Christian Bale, I would say for me, the one movie that came out, Ford versus Ferrari.
Very, very good.
I must have seen that movie on repeat. You know what? I might watch it today as well. Just thinking about
I've
it.
just seen it the one time, but I need to watch it again. I love that movie.
Same.
Oh no, the music, the story, and just him playing the character. I think the thing is with Christian Bale is just that, we talk about like how he changes physique, his weight during those scenes, but he is a phenomenon. He is one of those actors who gives his soul in the movie, gives his entire body language, and that's Christian Bale for you. I mean, that's our, like, I would say our generation kind of a thing, is that if I told my mom like, oh, Christian Bale's in his movie, and then she probably like, didn't that dude lost like 98 pounds to get a movie? And I'll be like, yeah.
Yeah. I can't talk about Christian Bale without highlighting The Fighter. He's so good in The Fighter. And American Psycho. Those are probably two of his best performances outside of Batman.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
The guy's built different. Quite literally.
Yeah. He commits to his roles. The Prestige. I loved him in The Prestige.
The Prestige. I forget he's even in
I
that.
don't want to spoil anything about the film, but
Intrigue. Okay. So I mean, for me, this is at its core, it's a superhero movie. But it's definitely a lot more than that. It's a crime thriller. It's a drama. It's a lot of different things. In terms of this movie came out in 2005, which is as crazy to think about in a couple years, 20 years ago. So how do you guys feel this movie has aged, and how do you think it will continue to age? And I'm sure it was a box office smash, right? Like, I don't think we need to even talk about the box office.
Yeah, I mean, it was so it had a budget of 150 million and it made 375 million. So that's a good success. I mean, it's not.
Yeah, it's the first movie. I mean, the second and third probably made so much money anyways because of the foundation this movie set.
Yeah, I mean, no, like absolutely. Like The Dark Knight itself, it made $1 billion. Dark Knight Rises made $1 billion. So they were the budget went up gradually. It was a lot higher for Rises. It was like $300 million, but for the first film, it was a little bit it underperformed slightly, I think, at the box office compared to the other two. But hey, it's got to gain traction.
Yeah. I mean, think about this. This came out after Batman versus Batman and Robin. So people still have like a little, like, kind of a sour taste in their mouth.
Oh man, that's quite a change, quite a shift.
Hey,
it's like when Casino Royale came out after Die Another Day. It's the same thing.
Gosh, guys, come on! What killed the dinosaur?
Was it the Ice Age?
Oh, well, yeah, exactly.
Oh man, Batman and Robin is a phenomenal comedy, though. I have to say, like, if you watch it with the right lens, it's a great time.
Just move the goalpost and then it's good.
To meet you. Ice to meet you.
They take one of the most, like, empathetic storylines for a villain maybe ever and turn it into Arnold. Like,
his arc in Batman the Animated Series. That's a in the comic, but Batman the Animated Series, that episode of Batman be like, it is a heartbreaking and it'll make you cry. But then But and that came out around the same time as Batman and Robin, which is the perplexing part. I think it came out like a year before. And like, oh, that's amazing. And then Batman Robin, Arnold Schwarzenegger, everybody. It does not have the same effect.
Yeah, so I think this movie will age much better than other Batmans just because it has the most relatability, it has the most engaging origin story. When comparing it to the first part of any Batman series, I think it is the strongest, even stronger than the Batman. Um, and then definitely stronger than Tim Burton's Batman, in my opinion. Which the only thing I really like in those movies is Jack Nicholson as Joker. I find them kind of boring personally. But yeah, I think it's going to age completely fine. I think maybe you could argue that some of the visual effects aren't that good, but I don't even think that's a real criticism. Like that's if I'm really looking for something.
It's like
That's all I can think of.
the only stuff I can think of is the train. I guess that's the
Yeah,
visual effect
it's
for
mostly
the
with the train
train.
sequence. Yeah.
But honestly, for the whole, it's not that bad. The only place I really noticed is the first time you see the train. I mean,
Yeah.
I gotta say this. I'm gonna kind of change topics here. In this whole podcast, we haven't talked about the one thing that every Nolan movie stand out. It's the soundtrack.
That's in my list. I was going to get to it eventually.
Well, oh
But
yeah,
I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, the
I-
Batman trilogy score is absolutely phenomenal. It's funny because they use a lot of the same sound beats throughout the series, but it's so good that you don't mind it being pretty much the same type of score in each movie. It's used so well. And I was looking at the score for this particular movie. It's because came out before the other two, obviously. Like each track has like a really interesting like name. In the other two movies soundtrack, it's like all the tracks are named after things in the movie. But in this movie, it's like Molossus and like it's like things like that. And I'm like, that's crazy. Just so it sounds so epic. It's cool. But yeah, I love the Hans Zimmer has worked with Chris Nolan for most of his projects up until most recently with Oppenheimer and Tenet. It was with Ludwig Göransson doing an equally incredible job with the score. Um, but Hans Zimmer's score in Batman it's top tier. It's too good.
So, if I had to add on like how this movie is gonna age throughout, like it's already been almost 20 years with this movie, and
gosh,
That's
2
wild,
years.
dude. That's crazy.
It's crazy to think about it, but I think this movie is gonna live on. This movie is gonna continue to live on to a point that it's just like, um, I mean, we're still talking about this. We still get gritty about it. We still want to like. I'm in my late 20s and I want to talk about it. Maybe 10 years from my late 30s, I'll be talking maybe in my late 80s. I'll be, talking to my great grandkids about like this movie. It's so amazing. So it's just like, this movie is like the beginning of the trilogy and at the same time the beginning of showing people how Christopher Nolan does his movie and how it changes. It changed the whole genre of the superhero movie. Yes, you had Spider-Man 2 being the best superhero movie of all time, but Batman Begins started a new chapter, I would say.
no, absolutely, I'd agree with that. What I do like about this film is there's nothing like Yashin said, aside from maybe the visual effects. There's nothing that particularly dates this film that much. I mean,
Yeah, it holds up.
my
And
opinion.
I think it's a piece of this trilogy, right? And this trilogy is going to go down as a legendary series in history.
Yeah.
So I think in that regard, it's just going to be a movie that if you want to appreciate this story arc to its fullest, you have to watch all three. So I think as a piece of this trilogy, it's a great piece. And yeah, I think it's going to age well because people are going to be watching this trilogy. And yeah, I think it's great. I think it's a great blockbuster. I think with all of his movies, you get an experience unlike you've seen before, as I've already said.
True. I mean, well, I guess I don't see it dating unless, in the future, sometimes themes kind of go in waves, unless in 20 years comic book movies are cartoony as as cartoony as they were in the 80s
Well, it
and
might be
90s.
heading back to
And,
the Batman and Robin wavelength with some of these MCU entries. I don't know.
like,
Been there,
like,
unfortunately.
I
Yeah.
mean,
I hope
that's kind
not.
of what I'm saying. That if it goes on that trajectory, maybe the fact that this is a little dark. Well, I mean, I say that with the Batman as dark as it is, but maybe the darkness of his film might date it. But I don't see that happening. I think the campiness of the Tim Burton one and that sort of stuff dates it. I don't think the
And I
style of
think
this one is going to date it.
I think what helps this series and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy is that they're self-contained stories. They're not concerned with setting up for other movies or other TV series or anything. It's just three self-contained movies about one character. And I think in the grand scheme of things, that's going to age well because now it's like you watch anything Marvel or DC, it's like you have to watch like 10 things before you even get around to watching it. And I think with this movie, it's like no, you have to watch three movies, and that's not a tall order. You can do that with the time you have, versus like, well, have you seen this series? Have you seen this character series? Like he'll make an appearance in this movie, which I watch everything, so like I actually am able to keep up with it. But I think the accessibility of a trilogy is just much. It's easier for a wider audience. So in that regard, I think it's going to age well.
I agree with that.
So we've talked about the very ending of the film is the very ending is when he talks about the Joker and how like there's more criminals on the rise as a result of what you did. There's like pros and cons to becoming Batman, delivering justice. So how do you guys feel about the ending of the film? I personally think it's a great ending, as I've said, but any more thoughts on the ending?
Well, I mean, I think it was one of the few cliffhanger endings that wasn't just like a low effort cash grab for the next, for another 2 years later when they release the next film. Like it makes sense because you understand the context behind the Batman. Like you understand that the Joker is his nemesis. If he's not going to be in the first movie, like he's going to show up at some point. So I think that it was tastefully done. Like there were like it didn't feel like it was shoehorned. Like I'm trying to think of an example of a movie where the sequel, like where the hinting at the sequel was shoehorned into it. I guess every Marvel movie ever.
An
Um,
example that comes to mind is the second Hobbit movie, where it
yes,
definitely lands on a cliffhanger.
yeah. I think that Batman Begins did it in a way that was appropriate and kind of still wrapped up the movie, but left you wondering what was next. Like I thought it was good. I did not have any problems with it.
Yeah, sure.
I agree. I think it does. It wraps up the story and sets up, gives you a little teaser of what's to come in a perfect way.
No, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, I think we mentioned this earlier, kind of the ending, how it kind of teases the Joker. It's perfect. It really, this is the logical end of this film and sets up perfectly for the next. I have no problem with the ending. I think it's great.
Yeah, for me, it's a good ending. I mean, just like I mentioned before, it was just the dialogue between Gordon and Batman. Just him, just the music being played in the background, and just him, just like I never got a chance to say thank you, and Batman looks and says like, "You never have to," and then jumps off. It's just like how perfect of an ending can you get? It's it's just great. It's a good ending.
I
Yep.
agree with that.
Perfect. Perfect. Sometimes it's just perfect. We don't have to. We just gotta say it as it is. And on the flip side, one of the more tougher questions: is there anything in the movie you would change to improve it, or is it perfect in your eyes? And there's no right or wrong answer.
I'll start. It's perfect.
I can't think of anything, honestly. I really can't.
Yeah, I can't think of anything for this whole series, to be honest. I mean, I could nitpick and find minor criticisms. Sure, I could say like
Voice.
I could say the voice is kind of silly. I can say it's a bit dramatic, but these are all things I end up liking about it if I really think about it. So I don't know. It's for me what the movie's trying to do. It does really well. And just to credit one of my favorite film critics, Roger Ebert gave this film 4 out of 4 stars when it came out. So he thinks it's perfect too, or he thought it's perfect. He since passed away. Um, but yeah, and if Austin, I see you thinking of there's I don't know if you have anything you would change.
I'm really trying to think of something because I mean, I could say that there's things that I would change, but then you have to remember the time when the movie came out and the
Right.
other movies were not out yet. So like a lot of the things that I think I'd be like, oh, I wish I'd seen this. Sometimes I'm actually thinking that with the context of the other movies, I guess what's an example? I know, like we were saying earlier, right? In Dark Knight Rises, a lot of that plot was kind of, I think that was almost more of a direct sequel to a lot of the Batman Begins plot lines than the Dark Knight was. So, I mean, in retrospect, you could say maybe there should have been some more tie-ins to Bane and the whole Ra's al Ghul stuff, so that would have been more seamless and less out of left field. But I think given the time when the movie came out, I don't know what to change. Like I think it would be
Yeah,
too hard to specify that.
that's fair. I know modern day Chris Nolan would have done that train sequence with practical effects because now he can like blow stuff up if he wants to. Like they give him the money for that. But
Yeah, absolutely. I guess if there's
um,
any change, it'd be that, but that's I guess it's the limitations of 2000.
maybe more Killian Murphy because you could never really have enough of him as Scarecrow. That might have been cool.
That would have been nice.
Um, maybe if he was a bigger, I mean, it's more of a criticism of the Dark Knight. Maybe if he was more involved in the Dark Knight, that could have been interesting. But they catch him at the beginning, so like it kind of makes sense with how this movie wraps up. Like I'm not, I every time I think of a criticism, I have a response to my own criticism for this whole series. So it's very difficult. But cool, yeah. I think we're all on the same page that we love this movie, which is awesome for a panel. Um, so before concluding this episode, are there any other talking points that anyone wants to discuss? Were there any questions for the group before we get to our final piece of the episode?
This movie is presented to us like as a reincarnation of Batman in a different universe. And it was just given to us to like, here it is. This is the Batman movie you guys been waiting for. And I mean
I'll,
this
I'll point
one
out. I'll just point out one more thing I could think of. So in this movie, Bruce Wayne chooses to live among the criminals to understand their psyche, and I think that's really interesting. I think it makes good and bad seem more complex in this universe.
That's true.
And as morality becomes more of a theme and subject in the second one, I think it's important for him to do that.
No, so I thought we were kind of talking about his origin story, and everything. I really thought it was interesting how they framed that. I feel like he took some liberties with his origin story a bit, how going living amongst the criminals. I mean, personally, I don't know. Most of my point of reference is Batman the Animated Series for his origin story. I haven't read the comics, but yeah, I do like that. He lives amongst criminals and he ends up in prison. I mean, that is his origin. I know in the series it's well established that when he was young, he traveled the world for several years, as he did here. Traveled the world to kind of find himself and do that. And I guess in this, he lives amongst the criminals. Like in the series, there were similar things where he learned martial arts, and I think he was in Japan at one point, learned martial arts sort of stuff. There's some parallels here. I think it's interesting how they did. There's some distinct parts of the story really unique. Also, how they borrow from other existing Batman media, like the series and the comics. Well, I thought it was interesting that he had, lived amongst the criminals. He ended up in prison. I thought that was really an interesting detail I hadn't seen in other Batman origin stories.
Yeah, I think what he does is he takes liberties with some of the characters and he makes it very much his own. This is very much inspired by Batman, if anything. It's not like I guess you could say it's a true Batman movie, but I think it's almost morphs into something entirely different, which is very cool and very different. So I like it. But so we wanted to ask everyone, if you had to convince someone to watch this movie, what would you tell them? What would be your sales pitch?
Well, I guess if you overlook the part where the movie sells itself, to be honest, just look at the cast, right? I mean, at the time, like Christian Bale, Liam Neeson, Cillian Murphy, like I know at the time they didn't have as big of resumes under their belts, but you knew they were good. Like you knew they were good. And Sameed, you said this is the Batman you've been looking for, right? Like this is, I think that's true. There's a whole lot of truth to that because up until that point, I think Batman had always had kind of it was kind of a fun and goofy sort of vibe to it, but I think this really kicked off the more gritty superhero, like the raw, real movies. And that's at the time that was unique. And I think that if people watch it, they're going to really be able to understand like the influence that this movie had on a lot of movies that came after it. Like I think that if people were to study cinematography from this era, they would see a ton of influence from Batman Begins, the Dark Knight trilogy, on other films. I don't know if it's been long enough to say that, but I bet you that people who have studied this film in their classes in college, let's say if they're a film student, like there's so much to go from there. And so that's why I think someone should watch this because it set the precedent for so much.
If my pitch was to watch this movie, not just because of Batman, but to discover the themes of grief, the themes of redemption, and survivor skill. Because if I would say this like I said, I watched this movie at the start of the pandemic when I had COVID, and watching this movie, and it was like it was like a normal Batman movie, that one that I love, great actors, actresses, the story, dialogue. I got no problem. But now I watch it, I'm like, it gives you an idea of how a person goes through grief. There is moments in which person is completely fine, and then grief hits them. The waves of grief, as they're called, and it hits, and then you're like, "Oh, I didn't know that you can't just heal over, like as people say, uh, time heals all grief, but it doesn't. You just live with the grief. You just live with it the rest of your life." And so I say that if anything changes this movie idea for me, it talks about grief in a very realism point of view. And I think that should be my selling pitch, that this Batman is realism. This Batman shows you what really happens to a person when he's trying to understand his grief, and how he tries to overcome this grief. But grief always gets him back because of the waves, and how he always tries to fight back with it. And if he wins, but that wave comes back again and swallows him up. And then again, he's in this wave of emotions that he overcomes it, gets drowned again, he recovers, and it just goes in this circle. So that's my sales pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, yeah, I guess my elevator pitch, my sales pitch here. I mean, I think it is the quintessential like a Batman origin story. I think it really does. It really highlights his motivations, the journeys he has to go through, kind of the logistical challenges of being Batman, getting this operation off the ground as well. Trying to figure. I love the scenes where him and Alfred they're in the new Batcave, and they're figuring out all the pieces for his armor and that sort of stuff. I just love that you see the early stages of Batman, and it kind of the the beginning of the story. Beginning of the story has been told in a lot of ways. This is the best way I've seen. So yeah.
Yeah, I think everything you guys have said echoes true for me as well. I would say, I mean, this is a movie, but that's by one of my favorite filmmakers, and it's early in his career. It's one of his first big blockbusters that he did. And if you want to see not only the origin story of Batman, but the origin story of Chris Nolan, this is a quintessential piece to his filmography, and what his career became is in large part due to the success of this movie and trilogy. Um, so yeah, I would just say if you're whether you're a Batman fan or not, or you're a comic book fan or not, this is just a great movie with a great human story and plenty of action and blockbuster spectacle. So if you haven't already seen it, definitely watch this whole series. You will not regret it. We have reached the end of today's discussion on Batman Begins. Wanted to thank Austin and Sameed for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. I really appreciate being on here. It's kind of a cool thing to talk through this. I've never done anything like this before. This is the first podcast I've ever been on. So I really appreciate that invitation and the chance to talk about pretty much my favorite movie of all time. So
Yeah,
thanks.
happy to have you.
Uh, again, Yash, thank you for allowing me in this panel. I mean, usually I did one with Liam with Jurassic Park for Inception. It was just us two back in high school again, and that had to be my favorite episode I must have done. And and also honor my dad in that one since he was the one who got me into movies. So, if there's and talking about a Batman movie like Christopher Nolan made, so I mean, it just kind of goes hand to hand that I had to join. So, if we ever do the Dark Knight Rises, well,
Yeah,
hopefully
I have another guest in mind for that one. Maybe we'll loop you in. We'll see.
I'll be down. I'll be down. But thank you again for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to have both of you on the show, and you're both welcome to come back again anytime you feel like there's a movie that you want to talk about. But wanted to give a big thanks to all of our listeners. We appreciate you listening. If you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can stay up to date on our new episodes by giving us a follow on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and support our show by checking out our available merch, which is linked in our bio on social media. And we hope you tune in next time.